In your DVD, and it's basically this. It talks about the cover kind of says it, and it's the Egyptian presence in the American Pacific Rim, the Great Smithsonian cover-up. Well, they're covering up history, and they're covering up giants, and they're covering up things they've gotten out of America and out of the Pacific Rim that's Egyptian-based, that the Egyptians were far more far-reaching than what anybody would ever imagine. The technology was far better than anybody would imagine. Talk about the what's in the Smithsonian and what they're covering up.
Well, first of all, the cover, as you've shown the cover, it shows a helicopter and special operations extracting an Egyptian mummy from the Grand Canyon. It may surprise people that 95% of the Grand Canyon is off limits. Here's where it gets interesting. Dr. Troy Quayle, who is quoted in this DVD, who set up the geology program at Arizona State University, used to take graduate students down the Grand Canyon. He passed away, years ago. But when one of the graduate students, Greg, asked him, why do all of the landforms in the Grand Canyon have Egyptian names, such as Temple of Isis, Temple of Ra, Temple of Horus? And he simply said to the graduate student, and my eyewitness to the Smithsonian was on one of those trips, for the unique artifacts that were found there. Now, if you go back to the Egyptians in the late 1800s, going to early 1900s, they requested Nubar Pasha, who was the Egyptian, and this is important, this isn't just, it's really important, the Egyptian president requested that all artifacts of value be returned to Egypt and that all giants and all of those things be destroyed. It's why the cover-up of history is the cover-over of true history, and that's why these people that are divorcing Americans, especially college students, this is a generation that the communists longed for because they would believe anything, knowing nothing, and could be persuaded to do their bidding. So the stuff in the Grand Canyon, that was taken from the Grand Canyon, Egyptian mummies, Egyptian idols, Egyptian sarcophaguses, Egyptian amulets, Egyptian jewelry, but the most important thing were the skeletons. Now, skeletons, the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory has now come up with a way to trace back, hundreds of generations, the identity by bone alone, not active DNA, through a new form of electron scanning, and also it's way more complicated than that, but let's just say this. They can read your bones and take you back and tell you who begot who. This is way beyond Ancestry and me or 23.com or whatever. The importance to this is that we're now seeing a invocation of Egyptian gods in America. For instance, obviously, we had Anubis that was paraded through from New York all across the United States, even into Denver. And we have the Temple of Baal. Now, what was unique about Baal
in New York City?
Yes.
They had an Arch of Baal in New York City.
Yes. And what's interesting, Baal demanded the lives of innocent children, babies, to be burned or to be slit, their throats slit. Now, somebody says, well, that's really gross. What does this have to do with contemporary politics? Contemporary politics is controlled by a supernatural evil that these men and women who control the finances, not all of them, and the mainstream media, they are all adepts. They are all initiates into the secret religion. So when Aldous Huxley makes that statement that by pharmacology and through occult means the world at the end time is going to be controlled by that, then you've got to understand that the world right now, we're seeing unparalleled and unequaled multiple events coming down that just quite candidly are astonishing in their intensity. Volcanoes going off worldwide. Some of the biggest volcanoes. And by the way, Greg, if you don't think the mainstream media controls the narrative, Krakatoa, which is one of the biggest volcanoes in the history, recorded history, that went off in 1883, the thing that was left after it exploded was basically Anak, the son of Krakatoa. That's what Anak means, or Anak means in Indonesian language. But Anak was the king of the giants. Now, why is this even related? because the 9.5 earthquake that happened there, the biggest in 100 years, the earthquake that is the most pronounced earthquake of magnitude, and by the way, they claim it went to 10 plus because it ran off their seismographs, but the point is this, is that isn't it astonishing that a volcano in Indonesia that was one of the two biggest incorporated in the recorded history, and it's the biggest volcano, biggest earthquake, is not being reported. Why? If they're covering it up, there is a reason. And let me share this about Yellowstone.
What's the reason? What's the reason?
The reason is because it announced, thank you, the reason is that Anak, is the root word of the Anakim, the giants. And all of the ancient historians referred to the time that when these, if you will, these gods, G-O-D-S, little g, would return, it would be in a geological upheaval. I had and why this is relevant, I had a lady who was with her children.
Did it uncover them? Did it uncover the giants?
Well, forgive me. At this point, the thing has gone into an eruptive phase, but people are claiming they're seeing all sorts of quote-unquote spiritual entities. And as the spiritual entities are increasing in their sightings, so are the flying saucers. Now, and we don't need to get into that. What we're seeing here, you guys, and this is my opinion, and Greg, I know you'll take heat for this, but if people will do their homework, they've got to start looking at why is something being covered up? Why is the Grand Canyon being covered up? Why is the history of giants, which there are 1,000 different reports in newspapers from the late 1800s? Then you find out that John Wesley Powell, who was a director and curator of the Smithsonian, formed a thing called the Cosmos Club. And he wanted to dispel the idea of any form of cross-sea navigation or influence, and he wanted to tell everybody that the world was isolated. Well, and that's called the doctrine of isolation. And what we know is that if the Egyptians were in the Grand Canyon of the Pacific Rim about 235 BC, then that also ties in. And how do we know that? Because of the star positions. And for the record, there was because of the star positions and the positions of the different geological and giant-made structures. The giant-made structures are the megalithic structures that are all over the world that line up with celestial coordinates or planetary coordinates. One of the stories out of Egypt last 3 days ago was for the first time in close to 2,400 years, the same projections, if you project the location of the Great Pyramid of Giza and the two lesser pyramids lining up with the specific stars they do line up with, that hasn't happened. So it's important for people to understand. When I was on Greg Hunter's show, and now I'm going to go to Antarctica, the Antarctica revelation I said would lead to Mars. And I said the next thing that will be happening was Mars. You remember that when I was on your show?
Yeah.
Okay, and then look at all the stories about Mars. Now it has water. Now it has microbial life form. Now it's got this. Now it's got that. Then there's so it's going, it's progressing. It's all leading us to that point where the aliens created us, and that's what the rulers of this world are in cahoots with, and they are fallen angels.
That's a lie. The aliens created us is a huge lie.
Yes, it is. And so, but people are going to believe it. But who do the people that want to persuade the existing population or the remaining population to believe that? They've got to get rid of the Christians. That's why there's an attack on the Bible. Good night. Billboards, the snowflakes, and I have another word for them, but I won't use it on your show. The snowflakes are protesting because there's a billboard for a preacher, Greg Laurie, and he's holding a book, the Bible. Well, listen, when they burn Bibles, they burn you. And so this is why this root of evil is a supernatural root of evil. I get emails from people seeing stuff that, quite candidly, I believe is real. And I want to say, go to the volcanoes. The volcanoes erupting simultaneously and the magnitude of the eruptions, Kilauea, for instance, you're just seeing the beginning of how bad it's going to get. Nobody wants to deal with global ash. Nobody wants to deal with ash in the upper upper atmosphere, that's because we got a bunch of dumb ashes, ASHES, that are trying to control the narrative. The cooling that's going on in some areas. Geoengineering. Geoengineering simply means if people doubt that weather control and modification is real, go read the Air Force 2025 publication, We Control the Weather. I mean, they already do. They're not waiting until 2025. And understand this, Greg, that it all is enveloped in the political realm. The fact that Donald Trump is believing that God's people make intercession for him and prayers, and the black community is shunning the black pastors that say, look, he's not a racist, he's a realist. This guy is doing. I have a past, you have a past. I'm not proud of my past, but as a Christian I can say thank God that there is forgiveness. And I do understand that the war is becoming more and more spiritual. You know, the first thing we do, I saw a T-shirt and a guy who had horns. This was up in Whitefish, Montana, at a hotel, and he had a T-shirt that said, Christians, your day is coming. Well, I'm telling you this, Christians, your day is here. Full-scale persecution is underway. The first they identify you, now they're vilifying. All the world's problems are based on Christians. Then they nullify you, meaning we got to get rid of the Christians. And then at some point, I don't know when that comes, but they start destroying. Now, in America, that hasn't happened yet. It's happening in Kenya. It's happening even in Canada now. Canada, because they have a prime minister that is pro-Islam and absolutely hates Christianity. The thing is that if you even preach or even speak out against transgender, you can go to prison.